Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
The rest, how many of you are doing computer science? Okay, good. So I'm going to make both of you talk to each other today, right? So those who like biology and don't like computer science, and those who like computer science and don't like biology, I think you have to reconsider your options and opinions today. And so, although it's good that all of you are doing math, I presume, right? So that's the good part. So unlike in a lot of other boards where you may have to actually pick between math and biology, I think that's no longer an option today. I'll have some slides that will sort of drive home the point a little better. So what are we going to talk about? I'm going to talk about something really unusual. I don't usually talk about this. This is not like my key area of research, although we've been trying to dabble in this. So how does science look at the interface of biology and computing? Okay, so this is an overview of our lab so that you know where I come from. We are an interdisciplinary group that focuses on computational approaches to understand and manipulate various biological networks. We've been focused on building scalable algorithms for metabolic network analysis and algorithms for designing, understanding how microbes interact with each other in communities, like various microbiomes could be the gut microbiome. We've also looked at various other interesting microbiomes, extreme microbiomes like in deep sea hydrothermal vents and so on. And we've also been applying metabolic networks analysis for in silico metabolic engineering, right? So how do you predict ways to engineer biological networks for overproducing commercially important molecules and so on. And we also work on large data analysis. We worked on cancer genomic data and multi-omic data for understanding disease. And I coordinate the Center for Integrative Biology and Systems Medicine. And I also work very closely with the Robert Bosch Center for Data Science and AI at IIT. So sampling of some ongoing projects in my lab, so you get a feel. How do you design a rational community metabolic network for metabolic engineering? How does redundancy exist in biological networks, and how do biological networks rewire when they are subject to perturbations and so on? Can you understand the infant gut microbiota a bit better using metabolic modeling? And then many others. So if you see, the common theme is, I think you will see networks in every single line here. So a lot of my work concerns networks, and I'll see if there's time later on, I'll come and give you a talk on networks. So back to today's talk. Computing and biology have had an exciting history, and this is a great time to be working on studying at the interface of computing and biology. Computing has been used to solve many problems in biology, I think, you know. So some examples, what kind of problems has computing helped solve? Genome sequencing. You couldn't do genome sequencing without the advanced algorithms that exist. And today, although you know we don't like to accept that protein folding is a solved problem, it's been huge inroads have been made by AlphaFold. I don't know if you've heard of this, right? So Google's DeepMind and AlphaFold have made huge inroads into predicting protein structure. But today's question is different. Can biology be used to solve computational problems? Okay, so this is a very, very different question, and the answer is yes. We'll see how. The Nobel Prize in Chemistry was in 2013 was given to Martin Karplus, Michael Levitt, and A.Ray Worcel. And this is not for identifying a new catalyst or finding a new chemical reaction or something like that, but it was for the development of multi-scale models of chemical systems. So essentially, they were given the Nobel Prize for building models, for building mathematical equations that describe how chemical systems work. And that's very interesting. And the site, they also said that today the computer is just as important a tool for chemists as the test tube. And so not just experimental, whatever, let me score out chemistry there and you can say biology or physics or whatever, not just experimental biology, chemistry or physics, but computational aspects of those fields are becoming very important. And simulations are becoming so realistic that you can actually replace experiments which are costly, time consuming, or very difficult to perform and things like that. Another very provocative paper which says that all biology is computational biology. And look at the words that are sitting together. He says that turning biology into a quantitative science. I think that's couldn't be more different, right? We, at least in school, I don't know how the syllabus has evolved over the years, but you still start learning about plants and taxonomy and all the rote learning stuff, instead of actually focusing on the molecular part, which is highly mathematical and highly quantitative and so on. So even if you have, I never used to like biology in school, but now I really like the kind of biology that I do, and I do teach a bit of biology in some of my courses and so on. And what he says here is that computational thinking and techniques are so central to the quest of understanding life, and he says that all biology is actually computational biology. So there are two main approaches to using biology to solve computational problems in some sense. One aspect is bio-inspired computation. Has anybody heard of a neural network? At least a few of you have heard. Anybody heard of genetic algorithms? Yeah, so a few people have heard of these kinds of concepts. But then those are bio-inspired computations, basically borrow ideas from biology and apply it in a computational fashion to solve problems. On the completely diametric opposite side, you have computation using biological components, so meaning carbon based computation, not silicon based computation. Right? Can you actually use life forms to compute in some fashion? The bigger question is, this was asked by a very famous physicist slash computer scientist John von Neumann, and he asked if, can you synthesize reliable solutions from unreliable components? So biology is anything but reliable, right? You don't feel the same way every day in the morning. There's so much of unreliability in how biological systems work. There are mutations that happen all the time when cells replicate and things like that. So there are no certainties in biology in some sense. So using such components which are so potentially unstable or unreliable, can you actually perform reliable operations like computation and things like that? And and there's also this notion of synthetic biology, which I'll try to visit at the end. So can you actually build new organisms that can compute or whatever? So some interesting books. I think some of these books may be there in the, at least wetware I remember suggesting it must be there in that. You have a big library here, right, of books. So this book may be there. I'm not sure the other books are there. This is, I think, freely available online from the author's website. And these are all interesting books. You'll also find them in the IIT library. So what's bio-inspired computation? Let's start with that. I'm first going to talk about something that's non-bio, which is simulated annealing, because this was the father of all these methods. And this was essentially the first approach to compute, but using an idea from physics. Have you heard of this term annealing? In sort of metallurgy, or you must have studied some copper smelting and all that, no? I remember being bored with those things in school. So basically you heat a metal to very high temperatures and you slowly cool it, and then at the end you have a nice bar of gold or copper or whatever. But what actually happens during this process is, if you think of the atoms, what happens to the atoms? The atoms have very, very high kinetic energy at very high temperatures. And as you start cooling it down, the temperature keeps, as the temperature keeps dropping, the kinetic energy keeps dropping, and the atoms sort of settle into nice positions in the structure of whatever, the metal and things like that. So ultimately you start off very jumpy, meaning very exploratory, and slowly you commit to a direction of exploration and you settle down at a very good solution. So that's trying to translate the physics to the mathematical aspect here. So how do you go about it? You perturb the configuration of a system and you accept moves that reduce a cost. So just a moment on what we are trying to do here. We are trying to solve optimization problems. You must have seen curves like this when you'll typically find the optimum by doing dx by dt equal to 0 and then checking f double dash x and things like this, standard stuff that you do. And this is of course a simple problem, but suppose you had to do this in a sort of a search fashion, meaning a lot of time you may not be able to compute the gradient and things like, meaning you may not be able to compute the derivative and things like that. So how do you optimize in such cases? So you typically start at a particular point and then ask the question, if I walk left or right, so remember this is a 1D curve or a 2D curve? 1D curve, no? This is y equals f of x. I've drawn it on a 2D board. This is just one dimensional curve, right? There is only one variable here. This is y equals f of x. So now x I can either move in this direction or this direction. There are only two choices I can ever make. X can increase or x can decrease. I have two directions for moving. So now when I move in this direction, does my curve increase or decrease? It decreases. In this direction it increases. But when I get here, either direction I go, the curve decreases. So I have actually reached a local maximum. So this is, in fact, this approach, so at any point of time, if you try to go in the direction of increasing function, it is known as hill climbing. You basically try to get to the top of this mountain. Hill climbing is a very simple, trivial optimization algorithm. But the problem is, if you started here, you might actually get stuck here, which is a local minimum, maximum and not the global maximum of this function. And that is the problem, and this is a very, very simple function. There are functions that will look like this. Good luck finding the optimum of this function, and well, we are not even talking about, typically we don't talk about 1D and 2D and all, we talk about 10D, 20D, 30D and things like that. So that will be like one surface that you can't even imagine. So you will have lots of minima, lots of maxima, and you may want to find the best solution in that case. It could be a very, not even a continuous space, it could be a discrete space. For example, what is the best way to schedule the IPL? Right. So you may want to minimize player travel, so fatigue from player travel, but obviously there has to be some travel. But then you don't like go from Chennai to whatever, Kolkata, then back to Chennai, back to Mumbai, back to Chennai, back to Delhi. Probably that's what they're doing. But can you optimize it in some fashion? And you don't want to have a single team without matches for 5 days, or you don't want the team to have matches in alternate days and things like that. So you may have such complex rules which will, so given a schedule, you might be able to score it. But imagine the space of schedules where you have about 70 odd games which have to be arranged. How do you optimize it? It's a very challenging problem, and you cannot compute the gradient for that. You can't do f dash x equal to 0 and try to find the optimum for that. Right? So you have to actually try different solutions and see what works, what does not work, and learn from those solutions somehow and optimize it. The point I'm trying to make is, there are classes of optimization problems that exist in very complex spaces where there are many minima, many maxima, and you have to somehow find the best of those. So simulated annealing comes up with a very beautiful idea, and this can be applied in a lot of scenarios. Much like your hill climbing, it says accept all moves that reduce cost, meaning reduce cost or increase value or whatever, right? You want to find the maximum. So accept all moves that go in this direction, but occasionally go in the opposite direction. Which means suppose if you were here and you got here, you might occasionally go in this direction and ultimately land up here. So jump out of a local minimum and local maximum and achieve a global maximum. So the idea here, what it does is, they never use these terms, but this is a very standard notion today in search and computing and so on. Explore versus exploit, meaning you explore different directions and at some point you start exploiting the direction which you are exploring. Okay, it's a very standard approach to, and what you do here is you are very exploratory in the initial part at high temperature, high kinetic energy, but you then particular direction of exploration and you settle down in a particular direction at later stage of the session. And there are a number of parameters which will influence how fast these algorithms converge and things like that. Okay. So now let's look at evolutionary algorithms. This is quite interesting. These are computational procedures that are patterned on evolution, or more interestingly, it says it's a search procedure that probabilistically applies search operators to a set of points in search space. A very interesting definition, because this is very different from anything else that like simulated annealing or any other optimization algorithms that exist, because it applies search operators. Note the plural and note the fact that there is something known as a search operator, and to a set of points in search space. So typically here what we were saying is, you are at x0, figure out a way to go to x1, and then from x1 figure out a way to go to x2, from x2 figure out a way to go to x3 and so on. But here it goes something like, give me x0, x1, x2, x3 and I'll tell you how to go to x4 or something like that. A very interesting approach. There are lots of different flavors. There is evolutionary algorithms. There are genetic algorithms, something known as evolutionary programming, evolution strategies, and so on. And also genetic programming, evolvable software, evolvable hardware, and fancy things like that. So let's have the biologists speak up. Some terminologies. I think I have a list of them. Okay. So you have the notion of a population of individuals, a generation, a gene, a mutation, a recombination, fitness, selection. All these are biological terms, but all these have computational equivalents. What are these? So first is, you have a population of individuals, which is nothing but a bunch of solutions to your problem, bunch of candidate solution, bunch of x naughts, if you will, starting points. Okay, and this is called one generation. This is a set of what we call parents. These parents will give rise to some children. And how do you create children from this generation of parents? There are two ways to do it. This is like, you can either do a mutation, meaning from a single parent you can come up with a child. And what is mutation? What is mutation in biology? A very simple change in genome sequence or something like that. What is a point mutation? One base changes. You have like ATCG, it will become ATGG or something like that. There is one small change. And here typically we represent the solutions as bit strings. Now a mutation means just that, change one bit. Okay. So there is also what is known as crossover. So this is like you inherit genetic material from both your parents. That gives you, better properties, right? So here, something like this, you do what's known as a crossover, and you get these two children at the end of the day. So suppose you have something like AB plus CD, you will get AD plus CB or something like that. So the parts of the material are exchanged between the parents, okay, to create some child solutions. this is very interesting. So think of this as, what does this mean mathematically? Mathematically, you can think of mutation as making a big jump in the space, and crossover as sort of trying to find some adjacent solutions to these two solutions. You can also think of it in the exact opposite fashion. You can think of mutation as making a small change and crossover as making a wholesale change and things like that. But essentially, these are two search operators that are giving you ways to generate new solution, ways to explore the space better. So now what you do, you have these parents and you have all these children. You now have to do survival of the fittest. How do you select? Do you know what is selection? Natural selection, right? So there are selection pressures, right? I don't know if you've you may not have seen this very interesting experiment. I like to talk about this experiment. It's got no relation to what we are studying today, but I hope I got the number of boxes right. So this is 1. Okay. So they put some antibiotic here. So bio people have all seen a petri dish with agar on it. So think of this as like one mega petri dish. I think this was 1 meter by, I don't know, 5 meters or 10 meters. I don't remember the size. That big an agar, a petri dish. And what they did was, here they put, I forget, E. coli or whatever, E. coli only I think, with a particular amount of antibiotic. Here they put 10 times, sorry, I think I got it wrong. Doesn't matter whether I got it wrong or not. It was either this way. The whole point is there were different levels of concentration of antibiotic. And look at the numbers, it's crazy. It's 1,000 times the original concentration. This is the minimum inhibitory concentration or whatever that's typically given in, like, to kill E. coli or whatever. And here it is 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. And what they found is, in all of these places, bacteria grew. They acquired different mutations and they could even survive at 1,000 times the concentration. Not everything, right? Like 0.001%, doesn't matter. But now these bacteria are resistant to even these absurdly high concentrations of the antibiotic. The point I was trying to make here is selection pressure. So you select for bacteria. This is what happens when you go home and put your mosquito spray or something, you are selecting for resistant mosquito. After that, in your house only there will be mosquitoes that cannot, won't respond to that spray at all, right? So you do selection. Here, how do we do selection? Real life selection happens based on fitness, ability to reproduce and survive, whatever. But here selection is based on the problem you are trying to solve. Suppose you want to solve x square minus 9. So the higher the lower the value of x square minus 9, the higher the fitness. Right? So something like that. So let's say we put this as the fitness function. And then you will ultimately end up with solutions that are able to solve this equation. Well, you don't want to use genetic algorithms to solve such a simple equation, but you can imagine using it in very complex scenarios. So you have to assemble an appropriate fitness function, and how do you select for solutions? This becomes a very interesting point. Do you pick only you had a population, let's say, I said population, right? So let's say initial population is 100 in size. I did some mutations, crossover, I got some 300, 200 children now. I have my new population is 100 parents plus 200 children, 300. The usual process is to make it again 100 by doing selection. How do you do the selection? You can select the best. So you mean on the top 100? You can select the top 100. You can even select the top 1 and replicate it 100 times. You can do whatever. So any idea that you come up will have like somebody must have already given it a name. So The one I said in terms of taking the top one and replicating it is known as elitist selection. That is problematic because it's literally like hill climbing. It does not, you are trying to get stuck in local maxima, local minima kind of problems. You can take the, the top 100, but one of the best ways to do it is something known as fitness proportionate selection. So you select individuals proportional to their fitness. Higher the fitness, higher probability of selection. But what does this mean? Lower fitness does not have zero probability of selection. Lower fitness can still find its way into the solution set, which means that you still have diversity, you still have the ability to explore various regions of the space, very simulated annealing types. By the way, I didn't mention while talking about simulated annealing, that very fancy way of occasionally going in the opposite direction is known as Metropolis criterion, and this was voted as one of the top 10 algorithms of the previous century. Okay, there's something else known as tournament selection and things like that. There are so many other ways to select. You can go and read about it. Let me skip over evolution strategies. Evolvable hardware. This is not exactly evolvable hardware, but evolvable hardware is about evolving digital or analog circuits. So, all of you have studied logic gates? You know what's an AND gate, what's an OR gate, something. So, if you wired AND, OR and NOR in certain fashions, you will get certain functions. But can you find various ways to, suppose you have a very complex function, you have to wire lots of gates in lots of different ways to come up with that complex function. And it turns out that that's an optimization problem. And any such optimization problem, you can try to throw it at simulated annealing or a genetic algorithm and things like that. There's something known as evolvable hardware, where people have tried to evolve circuits to perform certain functions and things like that. Look at this beautiful, non-beautiful antenna. So it's weird looking antenna, but this was designed by an evolutionary algorithm. So NASA used this, so this complicated shape was found by an evolutionary computer design program to create the best radiation pattern. So this is not what a human designer would come up with. It doesn't even look nice. But it's very cool that it had a very nice radiation pattern which was optimal for fitting it into their spacecraft. So the point is, such algorithms, not just bio-inspired or whatever, algorithms in general which have which are not constrained in any way to explore the search space, can come up with very new designs. So they can really explore corners of the search space and come up with designs that, say, humans may not have come up with. And now we can use this, we can now understand what's good about this and try to learn and mimic these. You have a question?
This is regarding something that you already said before. You said something about fitness selection, right? So what is the fitness that you're talking about in that situation? Like, is it the survival?
Here, for example, for this antenna, the fitness would be the best amount of radiation. So this antenna was designed to have the best radiation pattern. Imagine designing a fin or something like that, right? So that increases, that gives maximum heat dissipation or something like that. So that heat dissipation would become the fitness. So the more the fitness, or in the case of the IPL schedule, the best schedule will have the highest fitness. One that involves least travel or least whatever. You can put different metrics on it and things like that. So how do you represent this? You can use bit strings, but then how do you represent an IPL schedule as a bit string? And there are problems here, because suppose let's say this means RCB versus CSK, this means something, CSK versus MI, something like that. Let's say we had maps. Your problem is when you flip a bit, you may not end up with a correct schedule at all. You don't want two matches between the same team at the same venue. So some teams do play two matches, one home and one away. So for different kinds of problems, for scheduling problems, this is classic scheduling problem, like say exam timetabling. How do we come up with your board exam timetable? What's the best way to come? Because you want to, the ideal way to do that would be that there will be students who have registered for different courses, and they should not have too many exams too close to each other or whatever and things, and certainly not on the same day. right? So things like that. So you'll have to optimize for a lot of these things. So whenever you have like a very constrained optimization problem, some of these algorithms can be quite useful. So here what you may want to do is, you may want to define mutation as taking two matches and swapping them, or taking two exams and swapping them. So define a different mutation operator that maintains that every schedule that comes out should be a legal schedule. It should not miss out an exam or miss out a game or whatever. Okay. So I think I've explained a few of these things, and you have lots of wide and implausible applications. So any complex multi-objective optimization problem, you can try these. For example, in the context of computational biology, it's used for phylogenetic trees, multiple sequence alignment, protein folding. All these are some sort of optimization problems, if you can start thinking about it. What's a phylogenetic tree? A tree of life, right? Where you try to connect what organisms have had a common ancestor in the past and things like that. So there are many trees that are possible. Can you find the tree that gives the best similarity between the organisms? I mean, that keeps closest organisms, similar organisms closest to each other, something like that. So what is the best tree? Which organism should be at the root and which organism should be at the leaf and things like that. So that is one way. Multiple sequence alignment. How do you align multiple sequences so that you have maximized the similarity regions or conserved regions and things like that. Protein folding. How do you fold a protein so that it has the least energy? So I always say least, maximum, minimum, something like that. So these are all automatically, you should parse them, interpret them as optimization problems, etc. I will not get into all of these examples. So exam or course timetables, circuit design and so on. And a little unrelated, Stephanie Forrest has a very interesting talk on automatic software repair. And I think today it sounds very not science fiction at all, with ChatGPT writing all kinds of codes for you and things like that. So you can automatically have software codes being debugged and repaired as well. When to use evolutionary algorithms? They are quite useful. You need a careful choice of representation and all that. But the one big problem with evolutionary algorithms is the black box. You have no idea how it works. I don't think those guys had an idea why that antenna worked. You had to do a lot of analysis to understand ultimately why that antenna worked. So you don't know. So this black box is a bit of a problem. This is also a problem with artificial intelligence today. You keep hearing about explainable AI. Is your AI actually explainable? Let's say there is a decision that is taken saying that, okay, you show the AI an X-ray and says that this person is suffering from something, and why? If you cannot say that, I don't think a doctor would be willing to trust this diagnosis, right? So these are going to be some interesting discussions. I'm sure it will be discussed in one of your other talks. And okay, there are other methods like ant colony, etc., etc. I'll not get into all of that. Now let's come to the more interesting part of the talk, and at this point I can take a pause and focus on any questions.
Yeah, I have a question about what you said earlier. You said if the AI can't explain why doctors might not trust it, but the AI model is data trained, right? It's based on past data that it's identifying it now. Doesn't that on its own count as an explanation?
No. There's no explanation. Has to be something like...
Well, how would an actual doctor identify it then? It's nothing more than them seeing it in the past, right?
Fair enough, right? But I think doctors have better mental models. I mean, everybody has a model ultimately, right? The doctor says that, oh, there is this particular region, this looks like a tumor, so I'll do some additional test.
Yeah, but
the AI would just flag something. The AI it's just like that antenna, it must have figured out some very important principle, but it can never enunciate why. Whereas a human is able to explain, because I don't know if you've seen these, there are these things about adversarial inputs and things like that. So there are images. If you must have heard about all of these deep learning and deep networks that are used to predict what an image is. So you show the computer an image of a cat, it says that it's a cat. But it is possible to tweak certain irrelevant pixels, seemingly irrelevant pixels, which will never bother a human, on the cat and the computer starts predicting it as a dog. Just, in fact, I think they came up with one pixel that can be flipped that will now make the computer decide that it's a dog. And I don't know how it's going to explain that, right? So the thing is, there are in fact, this is not about explanation, this is about stable. So how stable is your prediction and so on, right? Just changing one pixel cannot change your complete output. So there are these, so the point though to be made is that when a doctor is typically able to explain why something is done, whereas an AI has gleaned that sort of pattern across millions of data points, and it doesn't actually tell you why it's making that decision. How do I put it? It basically tells you with 95% confidence that this person is diabetic or not. It cannot tell you that it judged that this person is diabetic because this person had like a particular value of triglycerides or something like that. That's not how the decision is actually made, right? Because we like to, in fact, that's the whole point. There are talks about giving the systems a vocabulary, so it is forced to give you these kinds of things. But how does ML work? I mean, I'm sort of deviating. Maybe we should take this at the end of the class. But how does ML work? It just projects your points to a very high dimensional space. You have no idea what that space is even. I'll give you a very simple example. If you had suppose you had points like this, very obvious, right? These points seem to be, and I get a new point here. I can predict that that point is belonging to this class. This is people with diabetes, people without diabetes, something like that. And this is nice. This could be some particular TG, triglyceride 1, triglyceride 2. I can use this to very carefully tell you whether how this person has diabetes, and I can say when this TG1 plus TG2 is greater than this, it comes here. Whatever is this line. When you are on this side of this line, the person is diabetic. When you are on this side of this line, the person is non-diabetic. Very simple. Now, this is getting complex. You can clearly see the pattern here. Right? I can draw a circle and I say whatever is outside that circle is in a particular class, whatever is inside the circle is in a particular class. But typically, how does AI work this? It will project this to a higher dimensional space and linearly separate it. And in that space, you've lost all your physical connotation of what that space is. So there is no way to explain. So not all models are built to explain. I mean, in fact, models, at least till like 5-10 years ago, were never built to explain. Models are built to see how good the predictions are. Anyway, I mean, there's so many layers to this. As long as we are using AI to flag, there's no problem. AI is not making ultimate life-impacting decisions. Let's say if, the best use of AI is to triage. You basically say that, oh, these are the X-rays that require more human oversight. These are the X-rays that don't require human oversight. And you can tune it appropriately. But maybe, this talk is not about AI, so we'll probably go back to it at the end of the class. But any other questions? So go read about other bio-inspired algorithms, right? And there are also bio-inspired, I think people have been trying to build materials that are inspired based on, or like structures that are copied from complexity of biological structures and things like that. I can't recall anything off the top of my head, but I've seen people talking about those things. So let's, yeah.
What does it mean to explain something? Like in the pixel flipping example, is this pixel has a particular color, this pixel has a particular color? That is considered a wrong explanation.
No, I think that wasn't the correct example. That was just to tell you that with such a small change, you can fundamentally change the prediction itself, which means that so there are these algorithms which will actually flag the pixels that are most important in making the decision about something. That is actually explanation. So maybe the nose of the dog and the eye of the dog is very important in making the decision that it is actually a dog. So, but even those are recent. Earlier algorithms would just say dog and cat. It wouldn't say that, oh, this is a dog because of this reason. So this notion of trying to tell you why something is a dog, that is explanation.
So does the model understand the explanation, or is it just
The model wouldn't understand the explanation. I think we have to constrain the models and or give it a vocabulary so that it can explain and things like that. So even that has to be done by a human that's building the model, right? So you have to sort of give it some constraint. I'm not an expert in this field, so I don't want to talk too much into this. But the notion is this, that can you give it a vocabulary? There are certain models that are very amenable to explanation. There's something known as decision trees. Decision trees basically are decision trees. So they keep asking binary questions. Is x greater than some alpha? Okay. So that's a fork. So whatever is greater than alpha, it will go to this part of the tree. Whatever is less than alpha will go to this part of the tree. Is y greater than beta, z greater than gamma? That will give you another fork. And now, at this point, these two might be class 1, these two might be class 2. So you can say if x greater than alpha, y greater than beta, and z less than gamma, it's class 2. Some other combination is class 1. So that's a very, very explainable thing. But when you throw things into some arbitrary high dimension space, where the axes themselves don't have any simple connotation. So this is, yeah, I really don't know how to explain this to a 12th standard person, because I don't think you've had this, you don't think about high dimensional spaces at all, right? We never do that in school. You sort of, because you have to actually think of all this in a high dimensional space. So, and first of all, we can only think of 3 dimensions. Beyond that, you have to extrapolate in your head, right? You can't visualize it even. But essentially, everything is about trying to, a lot of this machine learning or modeling is about trying to, you must have heard of clustering. So you group together points that are similar. But similar where? Similar in what space? Can you find the right space? It's all about projecting. So if you see this from the top, everything is mixed up. You have to actually see it from this side. If you see it from the top, all these, just imagine projecting everything to the x-axis, no? All these things will be bungled. You cannot really figure out. But then if you see it from here, it's all crystal clear as to how they separate. So the dimension that you project into is very important for you to figure out how you separate, and sometimes these are all artificial dimensions. These are not explicitly from the data. There are some axes, it is some, it's like vector, you're all familiar with vectors, no? So I and j is a coordinate axis, but I can very well have I plus j and I minus j as other coordinate axis as well. And at that point, the logic slowly starts diminishing, and when I have 10 dimensions and I mix all of those in like 10 different ways, and I look at a basis space for like a very complex dimension, I really don't have, the original data is just lost on it somewhere. But this is like a very oversimplified way to think about it. I think you bother Ravindran when he comes and talks to you. He's talking to you a few days later. He's the boss of this field. So you ask him for more on this. Yeah.
So you said that there are different ways. So in the evolutionary algorithm, you have a selection process. There are different ways of selecting. So could we use an evolutionary process to find the optimal selection?
Excellent question. I sort of jumped over this. So here, one of the evolution strategies actually does that. It plugs in these parameters. Maybe I should go into some more detail because you folks are quite enthused about this. There is a mutation rate mu, and there is, let's say, a crossover rate c, and so on. So, and there is a selection strategy s. All these are hyper parameters. Usually an algorithm tries to find the parameters of another problem. These are parameters that affect the algorithm itself. So they are called hyperparameters. They are parameters of the algorithm itself. And your point is, can you actually evolve these parameters? Can you use an evolutionary algorithm to identify these parameters essentially? And that's what, there are approaches like evolution strategies which do this. You basically encode these parameters also into the, like say the timetable or whatever. The first few components of the timetable are these parameters. So it might make the search faster by increasing the mutation rate or increasing the crossover rate based on the region of space it is in. And maybe it's in a better space, it starts slowing down and reducing the mutation rate or crossover rate and things like that. So this is very possible. It's an excellent question.
You said that when you are going through the generations, you have crossovers and mutations. So mutations will be much less than the number of mutations will be much less than the number of.
See, we are not trying to stay faithful to biology or something like that here. You can do whatever you want here. In fact, you don't even, there are what are known as Lamarckian genetic algorithms. The Lamarckian hypothesis is basically debunked if you look at it. But in the context of algorithms, we really don't mind. Anything that gives us a solution is fine. So you can use, so you have to tune the rate of mutation and crossover for your problem. In fact, nothing is fixed. Maybe for scheduling exam timetables, it is good to have high crossover and low mutation. And maybe for finding phylogenetic trees, it is better to have high mutation and less crossover. You can never say these things ahead of time. You have to do trial and error to figure out how these things work. Okay, I'll just do a couple of things, and this is computing with DNA. It's really fascinating. How do you use DNA to compute? And I want all of you to go back and read this paper. Okay, I'll try to share this. It's by this person called Adelman. Computer science folks, have you heard of RSA? Encryption. So that is Rivest, Shamir, and this very same guy Adelman. So this guy went and did biological experiments in a lab. He writes in the footnote of the paper, I thank somebody for teaching me how to work with RNA. So he's a computer scientist who actually went to a wet lab and did a lot of experiments. So what did he do? He did something known as, I can go back to IPL scheduling. This is something like that. Right. In fact, this is what your Flipkart delivery guy does every day. And so how do I make end deliveries using the least amount of fuel? I don't go and deliver something in Gopalapuram and then go to Nanganallur and then come back to Royapeta and then go back to Velachery. Right? So you have to do it more optimally. So how do you do that? Okay, this is a very standard, this is called the traveling salesperson problem, and a lot of difficult problems in computer science can be mapped back onto these. So CS folks, I think you will start realizing this very soon, that you will keep converting between problems. You will say, oh, this is the equivalent of this problem, so it is not solvable. So traveling salesperson is a notoriously difficult problem to solve. And this was Adelman's paper in Science in '94. He says the tools of molecular biology were used to solve an instance of the directed Hamiltonian path problem, and a small graph was included in molecules of DNA, and the operations were performed using enzymes. And this experiment demonstrates the feasibility of molecular computation. And okay, I'll skip some of these things. So if you're a computer scientist, you have multiple things at your disposal. You have a CPU that has a large instruction set. It can do various kinds of calculation. It can even compute sine, cosine and all directly. You don't have to write Taylor series to do it. Finally, that's what the CPU does. But it just gives you all of these high level computation things. But when you look at biology, what are the tools that you have? You have a few tools. You have Watson-Crick pairing. Everybody knows DNA bases. So A always pairs with T, C always pairs with G, and so on. Double-stranded DNA. And there are polymerases, which are enzymes which essentially are the copiers within the cell. There are ligases that can join DNA molecules, and nucleases that cut nucleic acids. And you can use electrophoresis to separate DNA by length and things like that. And today you can also synthesize DNA. These are basically your tools available, and this is all the biology you need to know to start thinking about DNA computing. So computing in general involves running an algorithm on some data to generate some other data. I gave a bunch of numbers You have to sort that and give it back to me. That's what an algorithm does. So you give it some numbers in an array, it will give you numbers in another array after sorting them. How do you encode data? Normally you will use some computers use binary to encode data. Here you have to encode data into DNA. How do you do that? And algorithms, you have to use the different tools that exist, like Watson-Crick pairing, gel electrophoresis, DNA cutting, DNA copying, whatever. And this is a history of DNA computing, a nice picture prepared by my student. So 1994 was the Hamiltonian path problem, and today you have people doing digital computing with DNA-based switching circuits, and DNA data storage is also there. I'll talk about it in a moment. DNA is really dense. So the average molecular weight of DNA is, I think, 620 Dalton. You've heard of Dalton? No.
Dalton's atomic theory we've heard of, not the unit.
As a molecular weight unit,
Only AMU.
like gram per mole, right? so the molecular weight of DNA is like 626. So can you compute how much you can store in DNA? A can be chose to represent 0, 0. T can represent 0, 1. C can represent 1, 0, and G can represent 1, 1. So A, T, C, G can actually represent 8 bits of information. Right? So one base of DNA can represent 2 bits. So DNA can, so 1 gram of DNA, how much data can it store? Homework. Try it out. You'll be surprised. I hope I don't have it on the slide, but it's about 700 TB of DNA, but that's very approximate. You can go and compute it exactly. I gave this as a problem in one of my exams. And there are lots of people trying to do DNA data storage, and George Church is one of the cool guys in the field. What George Church did was really crazy. He's written this book called Regenesis. I don't know if it's there in your library, but if you want it, you can sort of come to my lab. We have it. So in this book called Regenesis, they made a HTML version of this book, encoded it into DNA, and spotted that DNA on 100 copies of this book and gave it to people. So you can actually take this book, take that DNA, sequence it, and again generate the book from the book itself. So just for the fun of it. But the point being, you can actually store complex data like a book in DNA. The problem is that tomorrow that book will change on its own, right? Because DNA mutates. So you have to actually encode for error correction and things like that, and so on. But it's potentially a good way for archival storage. Things that you don't have to sequence. It's like things you don't want to retrieve on a regular basis and things like that. Just for archival storage, it's probably a very energy efficient, space efficient, green way to store things. Okay, so Adelman's original experiment, does there exist a Hamiltonian path in a given graph? Hamiltonian is nothing but you start at a node, you explore all the other nodes and come back to the starting point. You don't have to take all the edges. If you have to take all the edges, that's Eulerian. I'll try to talk about that if I find a slot to give you a talk on networks. But this is very simple. You start at your home. You have to make deliveries at 10 different places and come back home. So what is there are no good algorithms to solve it. In fact, the best way to solve this would be, suppose you have to do 10 deliveries, there are 10 factorial ways in which you can do it. You do all the 10 you compute the cost of each of those and find the best. Really problematic. So, what do we do? Here, of course, being that he was using DNA, he came up with a very crazy way to do this. He said generate a large number of DNA molecules, throw away those that are too long or too short, throw away those that don't pass through a given city and things like that. So it's a very different way. So you basically generate like lots of solutions and cull those solutions to retain only those that are following certain criteria. So it's a very weird way to compute, because on a computer you will never compute like this. Here because you can make lots of DNA molecules in parallel, you can totally do this. And this is an example. So he assembled something like DNA flight numbers and things like that, so that you can have base pairing matching. So the first part of the last part of this and the first part of this will actually join, and you can find out that there is a path between one place to another and things like that. Just basically using DNA base pairing. I'll not get into all the details. But the interesting thing you should note that 10 to the 14 paths were constructed in in a second. And 10 to the 19 ligation operation requires 1 joule. So it is so energy efficient. Of course, there are so many challenges. You can't use it for, all the computation that you do on your phone or whatever, but there's just immense potential here. And yeah, some more recent work on logic gates. So there are challenges and so on. And yeah. I don't know if you've heard of iGEM. Our students always participate in this competition. It's not yet gone to high schools, I think. It's an undergrad competition. And this is the Regenesis book I was talking about. So this is the question I like to leave you guys thinking. So you know the Turing Award, right? Turing Award is like sort of the Nobel Prize of computer science. So a Turing Award for a biologist, because here like chemists have already got a Nobel, or like modelers have already got a Nobel Prize. So the reverse of that. And Knuth is the greatest living computer scientist around. He says that he can't be as confident about computer science as he can be about biology. And biology has 500 years of exciting problems to solve. So I hope all the fellows doing computer science will still think about biology. You can still think about applying computation to solve biological problems. Definitely there's a lot of a scope there, and I think that's what Knuth is also referring to. And you should try and see this beautiful set of books that he's written. Okay, with that I'd like to acknowledge Sahana, who did a lot of work on this. She read so many papers and prepared that figure that you saw, and also we've had a lot of exciting discussions on DNA computing. You want to read more, you can look up our review here. It's in BioEssays. And yeah, so you can also check out this book where I talk about designing biological circuits. It's sort of related to what we discussed today. It doesn't talk about DNA computing. But that's about it. So feel free to get in touch with me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Sir, I saw a video of like an example of, so basically I'm pretty sure everyone has seen this video, but it was basically they took a bacteria and they kept like a piece of food next to the bacteria, and the bacteria like it grew to like create an efficient network between the food. So like that was used as like to build a railway system in somewhere else. So like
yeah. So that's, I think it's probably a slime mold, not bacterium.
Yeah,
I think that's yeah. So that's again. So you'll see some description about that in our paper as well. So yes. So essentially, there's a lot of computing that is performed by living beings. There's some decision making and some computing that's made, and potentially that could be leveraged for different aspects. Yeah. Very interesting actually.
So one of your slides said that so DNA computing, the main reason that we could use it is one, it's very dense, and two, you can do a lot of operations simultaneously. You can do a lot.
Yeah, so it's both parallelism and energy efficiency. So
there's the other, I've read about this other form of computing called quantum computing, which implements parallelism. Like it's not energy efficient, but it implements parallelism very effectively, and you can control it much better. So what do you think of like computing quantum?
yeah, definitely. I think quantum is something that everybody has been placing bets on for the last several decades. So probably some cool things we might get to see it in the future. Definitely, it's the point though is that it's important to think about unconventional computing, right? Not just your regular serial CPU computing. In fact, when GPUs first came, right? I mean, GPUs have been around for a long time, but I think for the last maybe 15 years, they've been highly used in computing. So if you see the supercomputers, they have lots more GPUs than CPUs today, simply because of energy efficiency. Your GPUs have like, I don't know, 4,000, 40,000 cores and things like that. But again at like 250 watts or something like that. Whereas your Intel i5 processor at 65 watts will have only like 8 cores. So it's so the cost per watt is much better for a GPU. And the point is, when GPUs came with like for thousands of cores and things like that, people have to reinvent or rethink how you compute various things. And I think we have to do that for quantum, for DNA and so on. So definitely quantum has huge, I think the government also announced a quantum mission for like 6,000 crores. So they are like really trying to push research in some of these areas, and lots of people working on that. Even in IIT Madras we have folks in the elect department working on quantum and physics, I think, working on quantum computing. So
all these different types of new computing methods will be used only for specialized reasons, they won't be used for the general.
no, for example, if you can solve something like traveling salesperson problem, you can solve like hundreds of thousands of problems. So they are like very day-to-day problems, right? So these are a lot of these problems. The point is, you try to take a very difficult problem which poses a computational barrier for current day computing, and you break that down using quantum or DNA or whatever. Once you do that, you've not just solved that problem, you solved like another million problems which are all mappable to that problem.
So they'll not be used to sending emails or...
You'll finally send emails faster or something like that, right? Because under email there'll be like a routing problem. I'm sure there is a traveling salesperson problem somewhere underlying email routing, right? So at some point of time, all these advances will come and bear on every simple problem that exists.
With the traveling salesman problem, how would you even know what the correct solution is? Like
You don't. That's the problem. For a simple problem like what this guy did, you can actually solve it, and you can determine that what Idleman gave was actually the correct solution. 7 cities, his problem was 7 cities. 7 factorial is 5040, not a problem. When you're talking about like 30 cities, it becomes very, very difficult. That's the challenge, right? So this is this class of problems where, so there are a class of problems where, for example, if finding if a number is prime is very difficult. But the moment, suppose you say that the number is composite, all I need to do is I just give you a factor, the job is done. So verification is easier in some of these cases. There are some problems that are difficult to solve but easy to verify. There are problems that are difficult to solve and difficult to verify. Even if you give a solution, it might take me forever to verify that that is the correct solution. So these are like, you'll learn about this in computer science, like NP hard, NP complete, and there are these classes of problems.
How do you think about a high-dimensional space?
You just restrict yourself to three dimensions, but always think about separating the points, or the moment I think about a classification problem, for me it's always trying to separate it into, you don't even need to think about 3 dimensions, you always think about 2 dimensions, but then you start building the notion that your axes aren't fixed. It's not just some x and y, it is some complex, this is some x plus y plus 3z, and that is from x plus 2y plus 4z, something like that. So you'll get over it, it's not a very difficult thing. So please do get in touch with me if you have any further questions.